Hi, I'm Joe and welcome to the channel. Probably the first scale that you'll learn when you want to learn to solo is the minor pentatonic scale. And for good reason. That scale basically has 2 notes per string, so it's very easy to memorize. And the notes, the 5 notes that make up this scale, all are the right notes, if you will, that sound good over a blues chord progression. The problem though with this scale is that sometimes as guitarists we learn a pattern, but we don't take time to stop and actually analyze the notes that we're playing over the chords that are happening in the music. And again, because this scale lends itself to always sounding good, we really just don't take the time to analyze it a little bit further. But it's sometimes important to do that because there's certain notes in the scale that will always sound stronger over certain chords in this scale. So I thought in this video series, we would dissect the minor pentatonic scale over each of the chords in a blues chord progression. So if you haven't subscribed already, please consider doing so and ring the bell so you'll be notified when the next video comes out in the series. In this video, we're going to take a look at the minor pentatonic scale over the 1 chord. Let's go ahead and grab a guitar and get started. So why is this important? Well, knowing the notes that you're playing over the specific chords that you're playing over will just allow you to know what options you have in terms of what notes to target in your solo. Your music can be described a lot of ways, and one way it's sometimes described is about tension and release. So certain notes you're going to find that when you're playing it over a specific chord, they're going to provide you some tension, and some are going to provide you some release. Now there's going to be a little bit of music theory in these lessons, and I bet you're probably saying, well Joe, this is the blues. I bet you all the blues greats didn't really care about theory. And you're probably right, they probably didn't. But they all had monster ears, and they knew exactly what notes to target because they were listening to the chords underneath them. Now there's something to be said though for theory. Theory helps us understand why those notes sounded good over the specific chords that they were playing over. It helps us analyze the music, and it also helps us communicate those ideas to other people. So you guys can learn, basically through theory, why those blues greats sounded so good when they were playing specific things. Now with that said, there really is no substitution for developing your ears and playing what you hear in your head out on the instrument. Whatever you're playing is going to be right, because if it sounds good, it is good. Music theory, again, is just a tool that we can use to help convey these ideas, but at the end of the day, it has to sound good, and so you're going to have to rely on your ears to do that. So for this whole series, we're going to stay and do something in the key of G. So we're going to do G blues. We'll have G7 to C7 to D7 and back to G7. And we're going to be using the G minor pentatonic scale, box 1. So before we dive into analyzing all this, let me just play that scale starting here, G. I'm going to play those 5 notes of the G pentatonic scale over just the G7 chord in this progression. And I'm just going to play, and I just want you to listen to each note. I'm not doing a solo here, I just want to play each note slowly so you can hear what it sounds like over the chord. So there's our G7, and I'm going to start with G. Did you hear anything funny in some of those notes? I mean, it was just the pentatonic scale, but certain notes sounded better over that chord, in my opinion, than other notes. And let's take a look at why that is. So technically what I played wasn't wrong. There was no wrong notes in that really, right? They're all coming from the minor pentatonic scale, but you could hear that certain notes sounded stronger over that G7 chord. Well, let's figure out why that is. If we're in the key of G, everything is being derived from the G major scale. So that is G, A, B, C, and G. Now the pentatonic scale is only 5 notes from that scale, and 2 of them have been altered. They're different than the major scale. And what does that mean? Well, if we look at these in terms of numbers, the major scale sounds like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, or the octave back to 1. If we look at the numbers of the pentatonic scale, we're altering 2 of the notes. We're taking the 3rd and we're making it a flatted 3, and we're taking the 7th and making it a flat 7. So that's why this sounds like this. 1, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 7, 1. Now why I'm talking in numbers is because this is a movable scale shape. So if you know the formula to make a minor pentatonic scale is always going to be 1, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 7, you can make that scale anywhere on the neck now that you know the formula. Now let's look at the G7 chord. What notes are in the G7 chord? Well, we have G, B, D, and F. Now what do you notice about this? Well, let's look at the scale degrees. Again, these chords are built off of the major scale, just like the minor pentatonic was. We have 1, 3, 5, flat 7. So what's interesting about this? What do we notice about this? Well, we notice that there's some of the notes that are in the minor pentatonic scale line up perfectly with the scale degrees that are used to build this chord. And some of them don't, right? So we have G, that lines up well. B, that's a 3, but in our scale we have a flat 3. We also have D, that's in our minor pentatonic scale. And we also have the flat 7. That's in our minor pentatonic scale as well. So we have basically 3 notes from the minor pentatonic scale that fit perfectly over the G7 chord. The only thing is that B flat really is not part of that chord. So if you noticed when we were playing along, maybe that was one of the notes that stood out to you. So now that we've covered that, let's go ahead and do that same exercise again. Let's just play over the G7. We're going to play the notes of the minor pentatonic scale, and I'll call out the degrees, the scale degrees, and we'll see what do those notes really sound like over that chord, and identify which of them kind of add tension, if you will, to that chord. So our G7 again, and we'll do 1. We'll do the root, G, 1. Sounds good. Now let's go to the B flat, the flat 3. That one rubs a little bit, right? It's not as stable as the G. Alright, let's go ahead and try now the 4, which is C. That one too also is a little bit unsettling. Back to the flat 3, back to the 1. Now let's try the 5. Let's try D, 5. Sounds pretty stable, right? Let's go ahead now and try the flat 7, the F. So it sounds okay. It's not as stable as the D or the G. But the flat 7 still doesn't sound that bad. It kind of leads you maybe up to the G or to the 1. So you could hear that a little bit better now. Now we know the flat 3 over the 1 chord sounds a little different. The 4 definitely clashed, and I think that clashed mainly because if we think about that G7 chord, we have G, B, and D. Well, C and D kind of clash. They're a second apart. And the same thing we have with the B flat, and you're also playing a B natural. So that clashes as well. But we do know that that B flat, the flat 3, is used a lot in solos. But what they do is, now you know why, they kind of push. They push that B flat up to get that major third from the chord. So that's one of the blues secrets, right? You slightly bend that up to imply the B natural in the chord. So here's the main takeaway. You notice that there are stronger chord tones. So listen to which ones those are over which chord you are, and here's a little clue and a little preview into the next lesson, into the next video. Some of these notes that might not sound good over the 1 chord might sound better over the 4 or the 5 chord. See, what happens is the flavor of the note changes over the chords that are underneath it. So the value of that note changes. So when one note was maybe potentially like a root in 1 chord, it becomes the 5th in another chord. And again, that's for a future video. So if you haven't done so already, please maybe consider subscribing down below and hitting that bell icon so you'll be notified when the next video comes out. But let's talk about this one step further. You know that when we're playing solos, we're not going to always land on those clashy parts. And that's the point of this, right? You want to target the notes that are strongest on the chords that you're playing over. But that doesn't mean that you can't use these other notes as passing tones to get to your final destination of maybe a solid tone or solid note for that chord that you're playing over. So let's demonstrate that a little bit. I'm going to use the flat 3 and the 4 in my solo, but I'm not going to land on them as like an ending point to my phrase. So there you saw I was playing around, I was dancing on those 2 notes in the pentatonic scale that didn't sound so good when I was just landing solid on them, but they sounded okay. They sounded okay when you're just passing through to get to the solid chord tones. So I hope you've kind of found that interesting. That's the minor pentatonic scale over the 1 chord. And again, in the next video, we're going to see the same process done over the 4 chord and the other video over the 5 chord. And this is something that you can do over any chord or any progression that you're playing over and any scale that you're using. Take a moment to stop and listen to what each note sounds like. So some practice tips. You can download this track that we've been using in this lesson for free in the link in the description below. And I encourage you just to loop a section of it if you can. If you have a DAW, just bring it in and loop it. And just play each individual note over the 1 chord. Hear what each note sounds like. What's the characteristic of that note? Really learn what that note is to you. This way, when you're playing, you know in your head, if you hear that note, that you can go to it during your solos. Take your time with this. It's really important to develop your ear. And just to do this as a simple little exercise. You don't have to play anything fancy. Just start playing each note and again listening to what it sounds like over the chord. Well, that's it for this video. I hope you found some value in it. If you did, please do me a favor and consider subscribing below, hitting the like button, knocking on the bell. All these things support the channel for free, and I'm very grateful for that. I hope you have a great day.